Welcome everyone to the Voice of the Diaspora. Today we will be discussing a very sensitive and emotional topic for our community. My name is Kenan Yaman. My guests are Baroness Meral Hussein and Fevzi Hussein from the Tottenham Park Cemetery Action Group. Welcome to both of you.
Welcome.
Now,
Hi, Kenan.
we know that the Tottenham Park Cemetery has various issues which you are both involved in trying to settle and sort out for the community. So in this respect, I would like to first hand over to Baroness Meral to please tell us about what the action is being taken to resolve some of the issues, and also if you can refer to what the issues are with this cemetery for the benefit of our community, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Onto your show. Thank you. This is a very important subject. We don't often talk about cemeteries a lot, but it's an issue we have to talk about because this cemetery, Tottenham Park Cemetery in Edmonton in North London, is a very important cemetery for the Turkish Cypriot diaspora in this country. The community started using it back in the 1970s, early 70s, some before. But this cemetery goes back to 1912. It's a very old burial ground for English people that were buried there over the last century. And we started to use it as a community. I got involved because, well, my brother died very young, sadly, in 1988. So he's buried there. My parents, my mother, my father are buried there. I've got uncles, cousins, and it's an important cemetery for me personally and for all of us involved in the Tottenham Park Cemetery Action Group. I got involved after my mother died in 2017 because I saw the condition had deteriorated. It was in such a bad condition. In winter, it's muddy, there's no pathways, it's crowded, it's unkept, trees are not looked after. In the summer, the weeds are so high, there's no proper maintenance that it's difficult to walk to get to the cemetery, to get round the cemetery. And in the recent years, as I mentioned, all the pathways, they've started burying in the pathway. So in order to get to your family grave, you've got to climb all over other graves, which is horrible. We shouldn't have to do that. It's such a disrespectful way. Every inch of that cemetery has been buried in. And the report that came out from the Ministry of Justice 2 years ago told us that it is now buried 7 deep. So if people are going there who still want to use it, need to think that they're burying around 7 deep already. It's not going to be a grave just purely for your loved one. It will be on top of 7 other people who've been buried there over the years. Here was a cemetery that was opened in 1912 for approximately 6,500 burials. It's now estimated to be around 49,000. And that just tells you how full it is. And we have been calling that we should stop more burials, just those that are reserved. We respect those that have already have reserved plots because they've paid for them. But we got involved because the poor state of the cemetery, the disrespect shown to the community, trees being thrown onto other graves, graves damaged by machinery, by diggers, very common. It's just a terrible, disrespectful place for our community to use and to be buried there. So our campaign calls for justice, respect, dignity for those of our loved ones who are buried there. They deserve better than this. And just because this is a Turkish Cypriot cemetery and it's a private cemetery, it doesn't mean that the law can't be changed, that things can't happen to get regulation, inspections, and even enforcement action to happen. So that's why I've been involved, and I've been helped by a fantastic team of volunteers, committed volunteers, like Fevzi and others, who all got loved ones buried there. But we have been absolutely committed in campaigning for the last, solidly for at least 3 years, over 3 years now, absolutely solid. There were campaigns before, but unfortunately they didn't get very far. We've now got Enfield Council fully behind us, supporting us. And now we've finally got the Ministry of Justice is now in dialogue with us about how we can improve things in the future.
Baroness Meral, I know you're a very busy person, and we're very grateful that you've come along today to talk to us about this very sensitive subject. And I know also that you're very pressed for time and you need to leave. So again, thanks very much for coming along. And I shall now turn to Fevzi.
Thank you. And do you mind if I have to leave? So is that okay? I'll leave in a few minutes. I'll have to leave to go to another meeting. But thank you very much for having us on your show. And
whenever you're ready.
Forward. Thank you.
So, Fevzi, can you please provide our audience a brief synopsis of the aims of the Tottenham Park Cemetery Action Group? Perhaps you can tell us when it was established, by whom, and what the aims and objectives of this group is. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kenan. I'd like to echo the Baroness's sentiments as well. We're grateful to be given a platform to air this very important campaign with your listeners. This cemetery is very close to the hearts of Turkish Cypriots. Our community has been involved in some shape or form for a long time. I think there was a Friends of the Cemetery group formed many years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even longer. And that group, was responsible for doing a lot of things in terms of the maintenance. I think they helped to build some of the main infrastructure there now with regards to the paths, the water that's available on site, the collection of the rubbish. So that group was doing a lot of the work initially. I think what happened was we saw as a community things weren't really changing. It's important to note our communities really dipped into their pockets as far as Tottenham Park Cemetery is concerned. Yeah, I would say that quite a lot of money has been raised historically to fund those things that I've just commented on. So fast forward to where we are now, for the last 3 years, 3 or 4 years, the action group was set up because we were fed up with the lack of progress at this cemetery. We were fed up with the continued stories, heartbreaking stories, the lack of dignity in death that we were seeing. You can't, for so many people who can't go to pay your respects to your loved ones who are buried, that is a basic fundamental right in our view. Anyone should be able to do that. So many people in our community can't go and do that, Kenan, because you can't get near to the grave because you have to step over other graves, you have to step onto other graves, and there's a lot of people who won't do that because it's not a good thing to do. So these issues are still coming up. We've had stories in the past about bones being found. I think the new owners have come along, and to be fair, there has been some initial improvements. But our Facebook page, which if you don't mind, I'll give the address for listeners to check on and see what's going on. It's TPC Montague Road Forum. There's so many people. I know people in Cyprus, Turkey, America, Canada, Australia will be watching this show. So many of us will have loved ones buried in this cemetery, so many. And it's important that people come onto that page because you will be kept up to date in terms of what's going on, and you'll be upset. Let's speak honestly and frankly here. People are going to be upset by what they see. It is not normal for that amount of gravestones to be broken. It's not normal, Gardash. Gravestones are thick marble. You walk around that cemetery and you just think to yourself, why is there so many broken memorials? It's just you know, it's just unacceptable. And we know that when some of our community has gone and raised this with the owners, they get told things like, "Oh, it's an act of God," you know. So, all right, listen. At the end of the day, you know, people have a choice, and we're very clear about this choice, because when you bury a loved one, my son is buried in Tottenham Park Cemetery. You don't think rationally. You just want to bury them. You know how our burial rites are, the rituals. People should be buried in 24 hours. So we just go into that mind of thinking we need to bury our loved ones. You don't think about all the issues that come up, that, you know, you're not getting the burial paperwork. You're not going to have easy access to the grave in years to come. And God forbid, if you go away, and you've got no one to look after the grave, as we've seen, some of the graves end up disappearing. So this is just a flavour of some of the issues that we're dealing with and challenging.
Is so full, Fevzi, apparently, that they're even digging up the pathways. And as you mentioned, people are having to step on graves, step over graves, broken headstones. This is absolutely shocking. This should not happen to a grave, a cemetery of anyone or any religion. Respect in this case is absolute tantamount. People must have respect in their death as well as during their lives. And, you know, the owners to bring this cemetery really into disrepute, as far as I'm concerned, and into this state is, in my opinion, shameful.
Well,
So
Ken, what I will say, look, I don't think I answered your initial question fully, because we are really lobbying hard, and obviously there's lots of community groups, you know, CONSE, BTCA, TCCA, everyone's coming together, which is brilliant to see, and it's really biting. Our campaign is beginning to bite, because the Ministry of Justice is aware that our community is not happy. You know, they commissioned a report back in 2019. It's not our words, right? This is the Ministry of Justice. You can go and check that report. They took aerial drone pictures of the cemetery, right? You've been told about how many people are buried in there. You look at that drone shot, the aerial shot, you will see just how packed that cemetery is. And it was opened in 1912. It's only got a capacity of about 6,000 graves. And you tell me how 49,000 people are buried in that cemetery. You know, there's a fantastic Jewish cemetery next door, immaculate, beautiful, and it's about 3 or 4 feet, maybe even more, lower the level compared to Tottenham Park Cemetery. What does that tell you? It tells you that the level has been increased to allow for these other burials. And even that
yes,
Ministry of Justice report says that cemetery is full. Now, we've got to get the message across to our community, Kenan. And I know it's difficult, particularly for our elders, because if you've got loved ones buried, if your husband is buried there or your wife, sometimes it's natural to say, Ben, I want to be laid to rest next to my wife or my kids. But we have to, unless you've got a reserved plot, which is what the point Meral made, unless you've got a reserved plot, you know, we really have to wake up as a community and look at the other options, because there are lots of other options.
Now, you mentioned the Ministry of Justice. Who are the official authorities that, other than them, that perhaps you've contacted thus far, and what was their response to you?
Well, Alex Chalk, MP, Right Honourable Alex Chalk, is the minister with responsibility in the Ministry of Justice. he is the person, his office is the department which is being bombarded with all these letters, because a lot of people are writing to their MPs, and the MPs in turn write to the Ministry of Justice. If there's any Dernek groups, any community associations, I would encourage you all to write directly to Alex Chalk. You know, this is beginning to have an impact. The people who have written have been told in response, the responses from the Ministry of Justice, that basically, Kenan, they're acknowledging the volume of contact from our community. And, you know, I think we should also point out that obviously Enfield Council has been incredibly supportive. They have really embraced supporting this campaign, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that we get a resolution that's satisfactory. So, but there's a number of options being explored, and you know, we're going to have that dialogue with them, and that's why it's important for people to keep on putting the pressure on, so they know it's a big issue. They will listen to us if they know that people are upset.
Yes, the community must contact their local MPs and bring this dreadful subject to their attention, because something certainly needs to be done. Is the Tottenham Park Cemetery regulated in any way, Fevzi, and if so, by who?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of the big problems, and I think this is a wider campaign. The legislation that's relevant to burials and cemeteries is called the Burial Act of 1865. So, you know, we're talking about legislation which is about 165 years old. It was updated, I think, in 1977, but it's all it's only applicable to local authority run cemeteries. So any private cemeteries have got kind of almost the freedom to do what they want to do. So if there's issues that we're seeing, it's very hard for the community to get you know, get a response or get a positive outcome, because these owners, and I'm not saying all private cemeteries are bad, because there are some very good ones, but certainly as far as Tottenham Park Cemetery is concerned, just going by the evidence that we see on our Facebook page, it's very hard for people to get a decent outcome when there's a problem, and that's primarily because there's a complete lack of regulation, and the Burial Act of 1865 doesn't apply.
You've already mentioned, Fevzi, that the Tottenham Park Cemetery is full, and yet more burials are taken there. How is this done? How can they do this, the owners of the cemetery?
Well, that's a question that I'm sure the authorities are posing to the owners as we speak. You know, it's difficult, Kenan, because you know if you go to the cemetery, there's a row as you go into the cemetery on the left hand side. There were some really big trees, and there used to be a lot of graves by there, and a lot of those trees have been removed, and clearly there was graves there, but that cemetery has always had issues with keeping records. So you know, that whole area on the left hand side, there's now a load of new graves. And you know as well as I do how badly our community has been affected with the coronavirus pandemic. We have lost a lot of people. So the demand on burial space is quite incredible at the moment. And I take my hat off to our mosques and funeral directors for the amazing work that our people of faith are doing at the moment. So, you know, that's why it's so important for people to get this message that there is a choice. You know, you could go Lavender Hill, you can go to Hainault. You know, there's so many other options even within a fairly close distance. And why, you know, you're going to pay minimum £6,000 just for the plot. If you want to go a bit deeper for a double plot, it's £8,000, and all you get is a receipt. You don't even get the deed, the burial deed paperwork. Why would you do that? Why would our people do that? You know, why not go to Lavender Hill? You get a 100-year lease. At Tottenham Park Cemetery, you get a 50-year lease. You know, if you're going to buy a new car, would you buy a car that's clearly less superior than another car? And for, you know, we wouldn't do that if you're buying a car or making an investment like that. So why is our people doing that? You know, I don't know, Adam.
Yes. After how many years, Fevzi, is a grave considered to be old?
Well, it's a good question, Kenan. When I buried my son, Rashid, in 2008, you get a deed paperwork, and the lease for the more newer burials is 50 years. Okay, but there's some small print at the bottom, and it makes the point that if the site of the grave becomes unkept, I can't remember the exact wordings, but basically, if you don't look after the grave, and a lot of people can't afford to put a mezar dash, the gravestones, you know, it's not cheap. And then it says after a year, if it's not kept in good condition, the cemetery has a right to reuse the plot, or it's wording to that effect. But it's not as simple as that, because they do have to put notices and contact the family. And you know, the people that we've spoken to who couldn't find their family loved ones' graves don't recall being contacted. It's not a problem unique to the current owners. It was going on a lot with the previous owners as well.
So I understand from what you're saying that the owners of the Tottenham Park Cemetery probably don't have a written procedure in their manual as to when a so-called old cemetery, old grave, can be reused. Because as you're aware, we're in the pandemic situation now. So, and quite rightly so, you mentioned that our community has suffered heavily from the pandemic. And therefore, there have been lots more burials at this cemetery. So it's quite ordinary, I suppose, for the owners to, I should say, desecrate, I suppose, because this is what's been done, the newer graves in order to get the new burials in there, because they have no procedure, as you say. This is terrible.
It's not just the procedure, Kenan. It's the lack of legal protection that we have. You know, it's difficult. I understand there are some rules and regulations, but I won't be able to go into them now. It's not an area I'm fully au fait with. But certainly, in terms of that Burials Act of 1865 and the update to that legislation in 1977, it does not offer us the level of protection. It doesn't offer us any protection. So, you know, I guess, you know, if you wanted to open a funeral, if you wanted to open a cemetery in your garden next week, you could do it. There's nothing stopping you from doing it. You know, this is the crazy thing about this. It needs to be much better regulated. But that battle is a more longer term aim, Kenan. Our concern right now, here and today, is Tottenham Park Cemetery and the issue around dignity in death, and all the issues that we've been highlighting, which a lot of the local MPs in Edmonton, Tottenham, Enfield, even Walthamstow, Hackney, even going out to Kent, because there's a lot of Turkish Cypriots in Kent. They've been writing to their MPs as well. They know that we've had enough, and you know, we have to do something about this.
Fevzi, since when has our community been using this cemetery?
it's really picked up as a Turkish Cypriot cemetery from the mid-70s, early 70s, I say, because that's kind of when you started getting Islamic areas integrated into some of the cemeteries. And it's very symbolic, actually, Kenan, because, you know, if you look at the migration of Turkish Cypriots when they started coming to the UK, majority sort of started migrating around the 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, and 60s. My dad came over in 1961. Some Turkish Cypriots came even earlier, 1920s. You know, those people who made those really brave migration journeys to lay the foundation, they lay the roots of their families for the generations to come. A lot of them are laid to rest in this cemetery. You know, and unfortunately, you know, you go, I challenge anyone watching this, go to Tottenham Park Cemetery, spend a bit of time going round there and see what the oldest gravestone is, right? That cemetery's been open since 1912. You can go to other cemeteries. Someone was talking about the Lefkosha cemetery, you know, it's people buried there from many years ago, and that cemetery is pristine, it's well looked after, you know, and likewise here in the UK, cemeteries like Highgate, which are historically very significant, you know, graves going back to the early 1900s, and they're in fantastic condition. We've also got the issue of 39 people, 39 servicemen from World War One and World War Two. I mean, obviously, that's not so much a community issue, but it's a point of significant importance that those soldiers are buried in that cemetery, but we don't know where they are. Well, you know, this is that place is just an utter scandal, to be honest.
We have learned from you that people who have loved ones in there or who go to bury their loved ones in this cemetery, they're not given any particular title deeds to a gravesite. How much does it cost to bury someone in this cemetery, and what does this entail? Because, as you say, they're not given any kind of paperwork except maybe a receipt for the monies received from the bereaved families.
Yeah, I mean, you just said it. I mean, that's pretty much the long and short of it. There's, you know, if you consider as well how tightly packed it is, and you know, to dig the grave, they use a mini digger, because you see the tracks of this machinery, and so it's getting harder and harder and harder to get into those spaces, even for a mini digger. And that's why you're getting a lot of these, you know, memorials and gravestones that are being damaged. There's pictures on the Facebook page, but yeah, you pay £6,000, Kenan, and you pretty much don't have much rights. You get, as you say, you just get a receipt. The owner has confirmed that they're in the process of doing what's called digital mapping. I think that was on the Ministry of Justice report from over 2 years ago. That mapping hasn't been done yet. I mean, how long does it take to do digital mapping? You know, he knew who was buried there. The cemetery is broken off into sections, I think. So, to me, for the community, it just sounds that we're being, I don't know, it's just disappointing to be treated like this as a community. It's very upsetting.
Very much so. Very much so. I think you might have mentioned earlier on which other cemeteries that are open for the use of the community. In North London, there is the in Enfield. What's the name of
Lavender Hill.
Lavender Hill. Now, I've got relatives there, and I visited that. It's slightly on a slope, and I've also visited the Tottenham Park Cemetery, which is also, I suppose, known as the Montague Road Cemetery by most of the community. Is that right?
Correct.
And the comparison between the two, and I have relatives in both of them, is actually quite stark, really. The Lavender Hill one seems to be very, very well run. I don't know whether that's private or not, as the Tottenham Park Cemetery is. But the difference between the two is quite stark.
Lavender Hill is a council-run, authority-run cemetery, Kenan. So it falls within the protection of the Burial Act. And as I said, you get all your burial paperwork. You have a longer lease. It's a cheaper, it's not as much of a financial burden on the family.
Yes.
And you're able to go to that cemetery knowing that you can go to the side of the grave where your loved one is buried and spend a quiet moment of reflection, which, not everyone can do that at Tottenham Park Cemetery without, having to unfortunately step on other graves.
Yes.
It's not on.
In conclusion, Fevzi, would you like to summarize and also maybe add any other points that you'd like to raise?
Yes, I would, Kenan. I think I'd really urge people to join our Facebook page, because that's a good way for the community to keep connected. We've all literally, we have all got loved ones buried in this cemetery. So your listeners, your viewers have an interest in this cemetery. Please join that Facebook page if you are on Facebook. I would really strongly urge, the art of lobbying as a campaign, as a community. We've not been known for our strengths as a community who puts pressure on MPs. But that's what your MPs are paid for. They're paid a lot of money. They're paid to represent your interests, their constituents' interests. So write to your MP and make the point that you've got loved ones in Tottenham Park Cemetery and you're very worried about how, some of the things that are going on. And you can make reference to the Ministry of Justice report in 2019 and a number of outstanding recommendations. So I'd really urge people watching to do that. And a final point I'd like to make, Kenan, is we've got a petition on change.org. If you go to change.org and search regulate private cemeteries, you will see a petition which has been organised by Tottenham Park Cemetery Action Group. We already have over 1,000 signatures on that. But, given how many people are affected by this, that should be 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, even more. So I'd urge everyone to go to change.org, sign that petition and share it. And obviously, big thanks to Canal T and yourself for allowing us to talk about this important issue.
I second what you've just said, Fevzi, and I urge the audience to please heed Fevzi's words and take those actions. Write to your MPs, get involved, because if we don't get involved, nothing will change. We need to organize, fight for our rights, because if we don't fight for our rights, nobody else will. Thank you so much, Fevzi Hussein, and thanks you earlier, she was with us earlier on, Baroness Meral. Thanks her too, for both your tremendous contribution to this show. I'm Kenan Yaman. I hope you enjoyed the show. Bye-bye.